Good mythical afternoon, everyone. This is Mr. A with another video for you. This is 5.5 Path to Victory, the very last slideshow for this unit. Hooray! Actually, I really like this stuff. So, let's begin. So, to start with, the war begins to shift to the south, and they leave the middle colonies because their power base is too far away from the middle or New England colony, so they shift southwards. And so they begin to shift southwards for a few reasons. One, they think that the loyalists in the south would join the British. The majority of the loyalists in the colonies would live in the south because of the plantation system. They also had rumors that slaves would join the British, and the idea was to give slaves who joined the British Empire the ability to be free after the war. But unfortunately, all the British really did was put them on a ship and ship them down to Jamaica or another one of their sugar plantation colonies. And they also wanted to use their southern ports to ship troops to and from the Caribbean. Because you got to remember, prior to this, they had to go from England all the way to New England or the middle colonies. Instead, they can actually take their items, their troops from, let's say, the Bahamas to Georgia or South Carolina versus, from England. And that way it was a much shorter route for their troops and their munitions and other weapons and items to be moved. So it was a lot more convenient for the British at that time. So the British begin to rack up multiple victories. They win at Savannah, Georgia, and Charlestown, South Carolina, which are the two major ports at this time in the southern colonies. There's a new American general for the southern areas known as Horatio Gates, and he was sent there to fight General Lord Cornwallis. So, meanwhile, in the backcountry and in the swamp areas, there's a gentleman known as Francis Marion, also known as the Swamp Fox. And what he would do is he had 20 men and boys who would use guerrilla tactics to constantly harass the British. So what would happen is the British would march in these big lines in their bright red uniforms, and because the southern colonies had very few roads, they would use the only roads or trails they had, and they were quite easy to spot. I mean, wearing bright red inside of a swamp, kind of simple to find you. So what they would do is that they would put the sharpshooters up and down the rows. And what they would do is Francis Marion would have his men and boys cut down trees, and they would fall on the roadway. And the British, because they're so obsessed with control and listening to those who are in charge, they just kind of stand there waiting to see what's going to occur. Meanwhile, the sharpshooters who are on the sides begin to take pop shots at these officers and other troops, and they freak out because they have no idea where they're coming from. And these British soldiers just start scattering, and they start running into the swamp, trying to chase after Swamp Fox and the Swamp Fox, aka Francis Marion, and he just kind of disappears into the swamp. This is why we call him the Swamp Fox, because he's sneaky like a fox, but it's in the swamp. And he's going to constantly do this in the south using guerrilla tactics. And so from there, in 1780, Horatio Gates is removed by Congress for fleeing from battle. So this was kind of like the straw that broke the camel's back. Because kind of what happened was Horatio Gates was constantly talking to Congress, trying to get General Washington removed from being commander of the Continental Army. And that failed. And because of that failure, and because he felt that he wasn't getting his due, he decided that when his next battle, when he got shot at by the British soldiers, he just fled, hopped on a horseback, and ran away. Then the tide begins to turn with a brand new Southern general. His name will be Nathaniel Greene. And Nathaniel Greene is a Quaker. He'll be known as the Fighting Quaker, and he will actually be kicked out of the Society of Friends, aka the Quaker Church, because he was not a pacifist. He was willing to fight. So in 1780, during the Battle of Kings Mountain, which would be one of the bloodiest battles of the American Revolutionary War, the Americans would win an astonishing victory. And because of this astonishing victory, the reduction of revenue to the British government and the increase of taxes in the British Isles and in their other colonies, opposition begins to grow in Britain itself. And it makes sense, because under British law, you should have representation in Parliament. But these colonists don't. And they're like, hey, King George III, hey, Parliament, you could have fixed this issue, but you wouldn't listen to the Americans. You wouldn't listen to their perspective. And now we're about to lose the colonies, which are about 40 to 50% of our wealth. And that's a major concern. Meanwhile, sorry about that jump cut. I kind of got interrupted. So meanwhile, General Lord Cornwallis of the British is deciding that he's going to get ready to winter his soldiers. And he finds a nice peninsula off the Virginia coast known as Yorktown. And it's September of 1781. So he sets up his winter camp and his soldiers are beginning to relax. Washington hears about this and he gets all excited because he finds out that the French fleet is actually finally making it off the coast of New York. So what ends up occurring, Washington and some of his other troops under Marquis de Lafayette begins to build a defensive bulwark on the land of the peninsula. And Cornwallis really isn't too concerned because he could always try to escape over the water using the British naval power. He had no clue that the French fleet were on its way. Washington sends a message, and the French fleet begins to blockade the coast of Virginia to stop the British from fleeing. So Cornwallis is stuck between a rock and a hard place. He has no good options. He could try to fight over the water and get blown up by the French fleet. He could try to fight through Washington, get blown up by the cannons, and all the help from all the different military, the troops and the militiamen that are in the area, or he could surrender. And Cornwallis is a lot like Washington. He'd much rather protect his troops to fight another day than to just let them all die, because he knows that even though this is likely to be the last battle of the American Revolutionary War, and if the Americans do gain independence, spoiler alert, we will, that likely the other European powers like France or Spain or even the German principalities may begin to attack Britain because they see that she is weak. So Cornwallis surrenders to protect his troops for a later battle. And this will be the last major battle of the American Revolutionary War. Though the treaty doesn't get signed until 1783, which is in approximately 2 years, there will be skirmishes that occur, but nothing major. A couple battles here on the western frontier, a couple battles, on the sea, but nothing major that changes the outcome of this war. So we get to the Treaty of Paris of 1783. This ends the American War of Independence. The United States achieves their main goal, which is to become free of the British colonies. This makes peace through the major belligerents between Britain, France, Spain, and the brand spanking new nation known as the United States of America. But there's a few issues still concerning. What are we going to do with all this new land that we're going to gain on the western frontier? How do we actually make a government work? And are these Articles of Confederation actually a good idea to continue? Well, I'll leave that for next time. And as always, don't forget to be awesome.